Behold, I am with you always until the end of the age. It seems like Christmas since I was last able to celebrate Mass here on Sunday. You'll indulge me if I go a little long. It was actually mid-March, but that seems so long ago at this point. There's been so much sickness, so much sorrow, so much fear, so much death, so many false starts, so many false hopes. And it's into this present plight that we find ourselves. We hear the promise that Christ made to us in today's gospel. Behold, I am with you always. It's how Matthew ends his gospel. This past Christmas, we heard the beginning of his gospel. Behold, the virgin shall be with child and bear a son, and they shall name him Emmanuel, which means God is with us. The whole of Matthew's gospel is bookend between these two statements that are very similar. Matthew wants to convey to us the central theme of his gospel. God is with us. That is his promise to us. That was his promise to his disciples, and that is his promise to this world. And God was with his apostles as they began to preach the gospel, to proclaim the gospel, as we heard in the Acts of the Apostles in today's first reading. God was with the church when St. Paul breathed out murderous threats against the Christians in Jerusalem, as he watched as St. Stephen gave his life as the first martyr for our faith. God was with the apostles as they were scattered to the four corners of the known world, where all but St. John were hunted down and killed for the crime of proclaiming Christ. God was with his church as St. Peter was crucified upside down in the Roman hippodrome. God was with the early church as they prayed in the basement churches of their homes, celebrating Mass while hiding from those who hated them for the simple fact that they would not burn incense to their idols. God was with the church as they descended into the catacombs to escape their persecutors throughout the Roman Empire. God was with the church as the Muslims invaded and conquered Christian city after Christian city throughout the Middle East and North Africa. God was with the church as the forces of the Sultan besieged the kingdoms of Christendom in Europe, seeking to strike Christ from the continent and forcing Christians to bend their knees to their foreign god. God was with the church as the Black Death ravaged its way through Europe. God was with the church as the English martyrs were torn limb from limb at the order of the king. God was with the church as the soldiers of the French Enlightenment, sanctioned by the state, sent religious sisters, priests to the guillotine. God was with the church as her chaplains, nurses, religious brothers and sisters ministered in hospital wards, leper colonies, and on battlefields, often at the cost of their lives, to minister to those in need. God was with the church when communism swept through the world and sought to extinguish the light of God with the darkness of men. God was with the church as lay men and women, religious brothers and sisters, priests and bishops were executed in concentration camps. God was with the church as it was huddled in prayer in the Cathedral of the Immaculate Conception on the Feast of the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary, as the cross-shaped structure was used to mark the target for the atomic bomb that dropped on Nagasaki. God was with the church in the gulags of the USSR, the re-education camps of China under tyrants in Vietnam, and suffering today in North Korea. God was with his church as Father Chad, the priest I lived with, shaved his beard, donned PPE, and anointed his parishioner dying of COVID. In every bitter pill that Christians have had to swallow in the past 2,000 years, in every dark place where tyrants have sought to destroy the light of faith, in every movement that sought to place human idols on the altars of Christ, In every plague that's infected humanity, in every sorrowing heart, God has been with his church. God is with his people. God has been faithful to his promise. He did not promise us that we would not suffer. He did not promise us that we would not die. He did not promise us that we would not confront the cross. He did not promise us that we would not be poor. Actually, he promised that we would suffer all these things. Take up your cross and follow me. And it is through these trials, through these fires, through these persecutions that are promised to us as Christians that bring us to him. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are they who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the land. Blessed are they who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall be shown mercy. Blessed are the clean of heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are they who are persecuted for the sake of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when they insult you and persecute you and utter every kind of false evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward will be great in heaven. Thus they persecuted the prophets that were before you. When we fear dying, when we fear sickness, when we fear persecution, when we fear forgiving, when we fear the path of peace, when we fear hunger, the ancient enemy of God and man will exploit this. Lucifer, the light bearer, will appear to us as an angel of light and bid us the salve for all the ills of this world, for all the pains, for all the misery that we encounter. He promises to save us from our fears, from all that menaces us in this life. And the cost is very simple for him. He just asks that we turn in on ourselves. Turn away from our brothers and sisters. Turn away from Christ. Turn toward our idols that we have in our own life. Power, money, lust, greed, life itself. And yet the cost that seems so small at the time is so large for all eternity, for the cost is to turn away from our inheritance, to focus on this life and lose sight of the life in heaven. Fear is the devil's tool. Fear is his weapon. Fear is his way. Fear is what the Romans used to try to stamp out the church. Fear is what the French Revolution sought to sow in the reign of terror. Fear is what communists used to control the masses. Fear is what Nazis used to bring about the final solution. Fear is what China uses to this day to eradicate the church. Fear is what the devil uses to keep us from ministering to the poor, the dying, the forgotten, the imprisoned, the immigrant, legal or illegal. Fear is what Satan uses to make us forget that we are Christians. When confronted with the menaces of this world, the people of this world confronted by fear seem to fall into two different extremes. One extreme wants to analyze our fears down to facts. They propose all sorts of facts, facts that promise to give us life beyond our fears. But if facts ruled our lives, then none of us would ever leave our homes. If facts ruled our lives, then we would change so many of our behaviors. Facts become our prison. According to the CDC, 480,000 people each year die in the U.S. from smoking-related disease. According to the CDC, 90 people die each and every day in traffic-related fatalities. According to the CDC, the seasonal flu kills between 12,000 and 61,000 Americans every year. But at the same time, the CDC reports that only 38% of the population will get a vaccine for it. According to the CDC, STDs have reached their highest levels ever seen in the United States. According to the CDC, there were 623,471 abortions in the United States in 2018. And we do not need the CDC to tell us that life itself on earth is a condition that is 100% fatal. No, facts cannot save us from our fears. Facts are not our salvation. Facts can prolong our existence, but they do not ennoble our lives. The other extreme is indifference, to descend into apathy, to numb ourselves so that we feel nothing. And in feeling nothing, we feel no fear. But that leaves us dead inside, existing, not living. We become zombies, and the world has too many zombies. For Christians, rather than becoming slaves to facts that thinly mask our fears or are even given to grow our fears, rather to give in to indifference and to numb ourselves from the trials of this world, for Christians, we allow faith in God to conquer the reign of fear in us. We allow the light of faith to allow us to confront the menaces of this world, to conquer the fear. We treat fear with respect, not more, not less than it deserves, but we treat it with respect. We acknowledge that we will die one day. We are not discouraged by it. We are not frightened by it. The only thing that matters is how we live, who we live for, who are we willing to die for. The greatest fear for a Christian is not in dying, but in not living. As Christians, we do not fear the menaces of the fallen world that Satan yields against us. We respect them. Respect not as in admiration, but the secondary definition, giving due regard. When fishing in Alaska last summer, we went into the heart of grizzly country, not afraid, but respectful of the bears that we could find there. We took every necessary precaution to keep us safe and them safe. In my training as a hospital chaplain, when called to minister to a man dying with AIDS, I respected the disease that was ravaging his body. I took all the precautions the doctors and nurses placed before me. But fear did not allow me from loving that man as he died. In the Roman Empire, the Christians retreated to the tombs not to cower in fear, but because the Romans themselves would not go down into the catacombs out of their own superstitious fears. And it was there in the catacombs that the Christians practiced their faith among the dead, unmolested by the living. The first words of Pope St. John Paul II, whose 100th birthday we just celebrated last week, as he began his pontificate, were, "Do not be afraid." And it was without fear that he went into the dark heart of communism and proclaimed Christ. He reminded the Polish people of their Christian dignity and their profound and beautiful heritage. He helped them cast out their shroud of fear that cloaked their minds and their hearts. For his efforts, the communists tried to assassinate him. But the thin facade of fear that the Soviets had clouded the minds of the repressed Polish people was torn asunder, and St. John Paul II is in heaven with God and with his flock, his faith intact, giving strength to the people he loved, all of whom outlived the evil empire that he destroyed by his faith. God was with my grandfather's pastor in the Soviet-occupied Ukraine when he defied the communists and illegally buried the bodies of those parishioners of his who were hanging from the limbs of trees, left to rot, to instill fear into the populace. When he was caught, his earthly body was strung up in those same trees, but I have no doubt that that nameless priest of God is in heaven and was in heaven more quickly than his parishioners could take his body down that night. God was with Dr. Gianna Mola, who contracted cancer when pregnant with her fourth child. She refused the surgery that would have allowed her to live but killed her unborn daughter. She gave her life so that her daughter might live. Saint Gianna Mola is in heaven with God. Her family is now the angels and saints of God as she awaits and prays for her daughter to come to her. God was with Brother Maximilian Kolbe as he stepped forward to take the place of a father who was to be sent to the execution chamber in Auschwitz. St. Maximilian Kolbe is in heaven with God, a life given so that this other man might live. The brightness of his faith pierced the vile darkness of that place. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness cannot overcome it. And in saving one life, he ignited the light of hope in so many people at the point of despair. By giving one life, he saved the lives of so many who were dying for lack of hope. God was with St. Damien de Voister as he landed on a remote Pacific island to minister to lepers left there to die, driven from their homes out of fear. St. Damien of Molokai became like those he ministered to every way as he gave his mortal to the body to the ravages of the disease that he was treating in the people that became his parishioners. He entered his Father's house with them. His scars of leprosy are badges of victory in heaven. God was with the 12-year-old girl, Agnes of Rome, who with the greatest poise, walking arm in arm with God her Father and Jesus her brother, could not be weighed down by the chains that the earthly captors put on her slender arms as the Romans tried to burn her alive in the Colosseum for sport. The fire would not ignite, so they had to settle for cutting off her head. St. Agnes is in heaven with God. Her life, her death, her faith shook the foundations of that pagan empire and ignited the fire of faith in all who watched her die. A decade later, pagan Rome would fall to Christianity. God was with John Baharim as he confronted his king about his unlawful marriage to his sister-in-law. St. John the Baptist lost his head on earth for that act, but now he only bows his head to the King in heaven, his true King. For Christians, we must never give in to any fear that this world places before us. When we entered the waters of baptism, we died with Christ, and we rose from the waters of baptism to new life, our life given to God. Do not desire to return to that which was drowned in the waters of holy baptism. Do not seek that life that was put to death. The Feast of the Ascension is our yearly reminder that we are no longer citizens of the earth, but rather citizens of heaven, waiting to rejoin our head. We are exiles waiting to return home. But while we are exiles here on earth, St. Matthew reminds us God is with us. He is with us when we pray, when we eat meals as families, when we have holy marriages, when we receive him in the sacraments, when we read the scriptures, when we love our brothers and sisters, when we sacrifice for each other out of love. When we are with God in this life, not only is he with us, not only do we participate in the life to come, but we begin to transform this earthly existence to become more and more like heaven. The words of Matthew's Gospels are echoed at the end of the Bible as well. St. John reminds us of our great dignity and our great destiny. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. The former heaven and the former earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. I also saw the holy city, a new Jerusalem, coming down from heaven by God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "Behold, God's dwelling is with the human race. He will dwell with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will always be with them as their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and there will be no more mourning, no more death, no more wailing, no more pain, for the old order has passed away." The one who sat on the throne said, "Behold, I make all things new." My brothers and sisters, do not allow fear to rob you of your inheritance. Do not allow fear to turn us away from loving God and loving our neighbor. Remember your dignity as Christians. Remember your destiny as Christians. Remember the God who is with us, Emmanuel, for one day we will be with him for all eternity.